I think it was certainly reasonable heading into the 2024 season to have playoff expectations for the Miami Dolphins. And you could say that because you know from Jump Street the Patriots were going to suck. Like everybody knew that. And anybody that knows ball knew that the Jets were going to be a raging disappointment this year and were no threat or shot at the playoffs either. So you're already from the beginning in a two-team division, and the theory was going to be that the Buffalo Bills had taken a step back with some of what they lost in terms of their skill players with Diggs and Gabe Davis, etc. Like, there's potentially a pathway, a door open here for the Dolphins to take the AFC East, and I think there were plenty of people that picked the Dolphins to win the AFC East. And that especially made sense if Tua was going to be able to stay healthy for a change and start most, if not all of his games. And if there was any improvement on the defensive side of the ball at all, that would just be an added bonus, right? But keep Tua upright, keep Tua healthy, you got a pretty good shot. Well, I will say this, the Dolphins did get a big improvement in their defensive performance in 2024 compared to the previous year. They went from 22nd in points allowed to top 10. They went from 10th in total yards allowed to 4th. So certainly, definitely a good enough defensive performance to have put the Miami Dolphins in a playoff position. This defense was good enough. They weren't elite, but you don't have to have an elite defense. But this was a competent, effective defense for most of 2024. But, and there's always a big but, and oh boy, here comes Tuanon, fucking ready to go crazy over a mid-ass quarterback. Big surprise. Tua's ass couldn't stay healthy, and he only played 11 games this year. Like, it's unbelievable. You just cannot fucking stay healthy. This team dug themselves a huge hole starting off 2-6, and it's really, really hard to recover from that. And, you know, when you have Tua like in games against Buffalo early in the year and then Houston late in the year where he has 3 interception performances, that certainly doesn't help matters. And it's easy to blame Tua. It is. You know, because I think those that are outside of the Tua non-cult associated with the Miami Dolphins fan base understand that, you know, kind of similar to Brock Purdy a little bit, right? Like, he's a good executor within structure, but he's not an elevator. He is not a multiplier as a quarterback. You know, he's an average NFL starting quarterback and maybe just a tad above that, but he is nothing more than that. And all this loyalty and devotion that the Tuanon cult has towards him is just astounding to me. It's kind of similar to the Fields cult with the Bears. And you're like, what the fuck is it? What is so awesome about this quarterback that you've got to defend him to the hilt no matter what? Like, what are you not seeing that frankly doesn't fucking exist that nobody else sees? It's psycho. But it can also be really, really easy to over-index on just blaming Tua not being an elite level quarterback, not being able to stay healthy again. Like, it's fair criticisms, but it's not just that, right? You know, Devon A-Chain played most of the season, but they ultimately did not have a 1,000-yard rusher. You know, Tyreek Hill took a step back. You can blame that on Tua not being there, but at the end of the day, no 1,000-yard receiver. A newsflash, General Manager Chris Grier has invested a ton of draft picks into that offensive line, a ton of money there, and their offensive line still absolutely sucks donkey. And that's even with Teron Armstead playing most of the season for a damn change. I know, it's a freaking miracle. But then you go to the defensive side of the ball. Bradley Chubb, this is a guy that gave up a first-round pick to trade for in the past, gave him a big contract. He didn't play a single game this year. Jalen Phillips, former first-round pick, and you're expecting big things out of off the edge, especially if you're not going to have Bradley Chubb. He goes down with an Achilles, and he only plays 4 games this season. And then when you look at the schedule itself, and you wonder, like, why did this team ultimately not make the playoffs? It's some of those different factors, right? But it's the early season loss to the Titans and the Week 18 loss to the Jets. That's the difference, ultimately. That's why this team didn't make the playoffs. You can't lose to those scrub-ass teams like that. It doesn't matter whether it happens at the beginning of the year or the end of the year. When it comes to the overall wins and losses and how they count in the stat column, they are the same. You just can't lose to those scrub-ass bad teams like that. So it was a disappointing outcome for a season for the Dolphins that had some expectations to it, and logically so. It should have had expectations to it. And it kind of sucks if you're a Dolphins fan because the defense improved and yet your team did not. It's crazy to me. And now you go into this offseason, Chris Grier is still your general manager for some reason, I don't know why. Mike McDaniel's your head coach still, but you got to think he's on the hot seat at this point and wonder if his shtick is starting to wear a little thin, and it's fair to question that, right? But the problem for the Dolphins is they're over the cap right now, and even if you say, well, the NFL is increasing the cap, that gives them more money. Everybody else is getting more money, so it doesn't matter. It's just inflation at that point. They do have sub-draft pick capital to work with. They got pick 12, then in round 2, pick 48, pick 98 in round 3, and then 2 fourths and 2 fifths, and they're going to need it. And if you're thinking like, hey, what are the big offseason needs here for the Miami Dolphins? Well, the first thing is they need key guys like Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb to get healthy again. And you might as well forget about Tua ever being healthy for an entire season and making every start. That's just not going to fucking happen. So it becomes even more critical for these other guys that you have invested a ton in each year into draft pick capital and or cap space. They've got to be back, they've got to be healthy, and they've got to be able to really produce. And then it's called investing in your fucking offensive line. We talk about, the importance of the trenches as a Bears fan. Certainly talk plenty about, how important it is to be good in the trenches on both sides of the ball, especially on the offensive side of the ball if you're trying to protect your quarterback. And the Dolphins just can't fucking do that. That offensive line sucks. So when you're asking what their needs are, like if the Miami Dolphins literally went into this entire draft and drafted nothing but offensive line, then I would applaud them for that, because I say they're taking a carpet bomb approach to solve by far the biggest problem on their roster. But then when you remember that it's Chris Greer making the evaluation in terms of drafting for the offensive line, and you're a Dolphins fan, you say, shit, it doesn't matter. You could throw 50 picks at this offensive line and they would still suck. But right tackle, big need. Left guard, huge need. Center, big need. Right guard, huge need. Left tackle from a depth standpoint, because Armstead's been healthy. At least he was for most of 2024, but it feels like you're really playing with fire if you're expecting more than 12 or 13 games out of him. So that's more of a depth thing. But you need 4 new starters on that offensive line, period. And if this is a draft where, already in an offseason where they don't have a ton of cap space, so it's going to limit their flexibility, it's going to limit what they're going to be able to do in the open market to address those gaping, raging voids in the talent on their offensive line, it's going to have a heavy emphasis and focus in the draft on that positional group. It just has to. Because that line has been substandard, is substandard, and if it's not effectively addressed, will continue to be substandard, which will continue to lead to more injury risk for Tua Tagovailoa, which will then lead to continued lack of realizing of full potential for that Dolphins offense. I don't care what order you do it at this point, but in like rounds 1, rounds 2, rounds 3, rounds 4, rounds 5, that needs to be so heavily invested in offensive line, it fucking is crazy. Go at your weakness. You have to address this, because until they do, none of the shit matters and nobody should take them seriously.